Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Lageson, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars, in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD China. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president of the Institute for the American Future, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China. This is a program that, as is true of most of them, is going to focus in on a particular line of attack of the Chinese Communist Party against America and her people, pursuant to a policy or a doctrine, if you will, that has come to be known as unrestricted warfare. We're going to be talking about it with a number of people who have both insights into what is going on as well as an appreciation of what it means for all of us. And before we do, I just have to say that one of the small wonders of these programs is that oftentimes they come together at the last possible moment. Sometimes they come together after the last possible moment. And this is the case today. We invited a man who has contributed mightily to our understanding of this particular problem, namely what the Chinese Communist Party and its mafia partners, and notice the triad groups, have been doing inside America to wage what I think can only be described as chemical warfare. One of our panelists is going to speak a bit more about the nature of that warfare, but much of this has been unveiled rather, I think, compellingly in an interview that the man that we had hoped would be with us in person, Steve Robinson, communicated in two forms with Tucker Carlson. One, a very compelling, as I say, interview that was released recently as part of Tucker Carlson's news network, and also a documentary film variation on that theme, in which Steve again featured prominently. It's called High Times, and it is about what the Chinese are doing to, well, advance the cause that all of their unrestricted warfare efforts are aimed at, namely destroying our country. So the problem was that Steve Robinson didn't quite get the memo. He responded just a few minutes ago that he would be joining us, which was the good news. The bad news is he's going to be joining us tomorrow, as opposed to right now. So I'm hoping he will get the message that it is now and that he will join us. But to sort of set the stage for what we're about, I wanted to do, well, I guess I'd call it a dramatic reading of some of Steve's comments in the course of a 2-hour interview with Tucker. And let me just say, I have my differences with Tucker on a number of issues, but when he does his actual day job of reporting, there are few who are better at it, and I think this interview is an example of it, and I commend him for his attention to the matter, as well as the kind of information that, with his help, Steve has communicated. So I'm reading from a transcript of the interview that he did with him, with Steve, that is, and I'm going to try to move through it very swiftly, but there's so much important content here that I want to ask your indulgence to give you a fair amount of text as quickly as I can. Steve started off the interview by noting that I would say there's probably 300 to 400 properties throughout the state of Maine that are under the control of what the Department of Homeland Security under President Biden called Asian transnational criminal organizations, unquote. Chinese mafia, I think, is a better term and an easier way to understand it. There's one of those next to my high school basketball coach's house. One of these next to, the guy who ended up marrying my high school girlfriend. He's got a Chinese marijuana grow next to him. There's a Chinese marijuana grow next to the first place that I got drunk with my high school friends. There's a Chinese marijuana grow on my camp road that has since been busted. There's a Chinese marijuana grow on my dad's road in St. Albans. They're everywhere. They're in former schools, former nursing homes, and we were able to find them as part of his investigation. I guess it was a period of 7 or 8 months I spent driving all around the state of Maine, seeing story after story after story, interviewing all these people and seeing how scared people were, how terrified people were, how well known the story was amongst people. The Chinese mafia have the advantage of not paying taxes, no regulatory compliance. They're not paying their labor a significant amount of money. They're using pesticides and fungicides illegally that reduce their product loss. They can also export marijuana. About 2/3 of the product that they grow illegally leaves the state of Maine. Legal growers aren't allowed to do that because it's not federally legal yet. So if you have all these built-in cost advantages, you can get a significant amount of money off of it. And they also consider it very low risk. They were right to consider it low risk because when the state of Maine legalized marijuana, just like what happened in Washington State and in Oklahoma and in California, it changes the culture of law enforcement. We sent a signal to law enforcement that marijuana was no longer a problem. It was legal. People voted, stopped paying attention to marijuana, and cops who busted significant marijuana busts were kind of laughed at, like, that's just pot, that's legal, why are you doing that? Fentanyl is the priority. He went on. We also have all kinds of legal marijuana grows happening, and that functions as camouflage for what the Chinese are doing. So it might not be the most lucrative activity, but it's pretty lucrative. But it's low risk, very low risk for them because at worst, they're going to get arrested. You're going to get a mugshot taken. You're going to get $2,000 bail, and you'll be released and probably never have to show up at court. You go to New York and get a new driver's license with a new name, come back and find a different marijuana grow to work at. So really, no one suffers any consequences from this incredibly lucrative activity that they're engaged in. Stephen Tucker then went on to talk about the economic collapse of small-town America. And I think our next speaker will be talking about that as well. When I go home, I don't recognize anybody in Dexter, Maine, anymore. My family, my friends, for the most part, have all moved away. I see Dexter in the headlines a lot for fentanyl raids and busts, but the town has really been hollowed out. And I think it was the collapse, the economic collapse, and the despair in the town just created low real estate prices for entrepreneurs from foreign countries to take advantage of. There are grow houses. There are flop houses. There are prostitution houses masquerading as massage parlors. There are some, I guess, financial hubs that you might say in Kittery and Old Orchard Beach in southern parts of the state. There are other facilities that seem distinctly militaristic in character. Your hair stands up on end when you go by one. I've knocked on the doors of a lot of marijuana facilities, but in Greenbush, Maine, it's about 35 minutes north of Bangor, very rural. But there's an area where there are multiple adjacent properties, all controlled, all fenced off. Motion sensors on the road so that they know if someone's coming well in advance. And blue-collar workers I've talked to who have had to come out and do some load testing, if, for example, they're an electrical worker, stopped physically and prevented from accessing the property, and they're escorted off the property with two, excuse me, I skipped a stage. And blue-collar workers I've talked to who have come out and to do some service at these properties have talked about being surveilled by crews of 8 Chinese young men, close-cropped haircuts, fatigues. And when they need to access the property to do some load testing, if they're, for example, an electrical worker, they're physically stopped and prevented from accessing the property, and they're escorted off it with 2 crisp $100 bills tucked in their back pocket. And they say, "Coffee money, coffee money, coffee money." And they push them off the property. You can execute a search warrant if you're in law enforcement on one of these facilities. You can go in and you can arrest some people. You can destroy their plants, but the very next day, it can get spun up again. And all that they have to say is they're getting a license. They're in the process of getting a license to operate legally, and then law enforcement can't touch them. So in January, the director of the Office of Cannabis Policy, handpicked by Governor Janet Mills, a guy named John Hudak, admitted he's in front of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee testifying for the first time this year of this session. And he admits that they've been giving licenses, medical marijuana licenses, to individuals that he suspects have ties to Chinese organized crime. Or he's giving licenses to people who provide addresses for their grows at properties that have been previously raided for their connections to Chinese organized crime. And that his hands are tied. There's nothing he can do about it. The subject then turns to, said Governor Janet Mills. He says, the state under Governor Janet Mills has embraced restorative justice and harm reduction. And the idea that if you stop enforcing laws against drugs, you pass out needles and Narcan, and that's going to be good for society. I think the plain, objective evidence is that's been a complete failure. But on the Chinese criminal conspiracy in the state, we've approached her at events and tried to ask her about it, and she won't answer questions directly. So that is the million-dollar question. The governor's brother, Paul Mills, has been involved in notarizing deeds for individuals connected to Chinese organized crime and was the real estate transfer authority specifically for a piece of property which he helped transfer as a gift to the ownership of a Chinese national who owns multiple marijuana grows in the state of Maine. And it was done days after a law enforcement action in that area. They then turned to environmental predation. This was one of the most chilling pieces of the interview. He says, every single house that has had one of these Chinese marijuana grows, the best use for it is potentially practice for the fire department. They all need to be torn down. They're super sites, super fund sites. We don't even know the extent of the damage that has been done as a result of the Chinese pesticides and fungicides that have been imported from China illegally into California and then shipped to Maine and used at these sites as fumigants. California has had a really bad problem with this. He goes on to talk about hoop houses and massive greenhouses that are operated there. And they've been investigated from, he says, an environmental perspective because they've weakened their drug laws so much in California that no one cares about illegal marijuana. But they do care about water diversion to supply the cannabis, and they care about the contamination of these pristine wildlife environments with the chemical runoff. He goes on to say, there's no regulated use for many of these pesticides and fungicides because they're so deadly for humans. But it's even worse than that. They're using chemicals that are not licensed for use in the United States and are deadly. Sometimes some of them aren't even licensed for use in China, which is notorious, I think he meant to say, for their concern for environmental rights, human rights, and environmental degradation, or lack concern, more to the point. He then goes on to say, but they're also not very well studied. Used together in like 8 of them together, 12 of them together, they're not studied when you burn them. They're not studied when you apply them to marijuana and eat the marijuana. They're not studied when you apply them to marijuana and smoke the marijuana. They're not studied when you use them in all these different combinations and then do a gas extraction process to extract the THC oil and a more potent version of this pesticide fumigant. They're not studied at all. They were unknown. They only identified a lot of these chemicals seriously because they brought in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Unit from the Army National Guard because the conventional labs couldn't test for them. And there's no lab in the state of Maine that can test for them that I know of. They're coming here from California, these chemicals, shipped here illegally from China and being distributed here. And if they're in that grow in Somerset County, you could assume that they're all in all these grows, and they dump mad science concoctions of pesticides with sawdust and ammonium nitrate and a little fuse and a half-cup beer can, and they let it smolder. And the smoke fills the house, and it covers the marijuana plants so the mites won't grow and the mildew won't grow. So you have minimal product loss. They're very effective at mitigating any kind of pesticide or pest damage to your marijuana product, but it coats every corner of the house. And these dangerous chemicals, so we have no way of testing for them. There's no real estate disclosure. Just a few more detailed points here. He says the Lincoln County Sheriff has videotaped surveillance evidence of illegal dumping going on behind these sites. There's Machias out in Washington County in a marijuana grow I visited there. You could almost study the ages of marijuana cultivation there by looking at the strata of styrofoam or fiberglass substrate that they start the marijuana plants in, because they were just layers and layers and layers and layers where they'd been growing marijuana, because they just take it when they're done with it and throw it out in the backyard. So the entire property in Machias, it's a beautiful farm, overlooks the waters, just could be someone's paradise, and the soil will be permanently contaminated with God knows what chemicals and fiberglass. It's everywhere, distributed throughout the property. Every single one of these places has like an unknown level of contamination, water contamination, soil contamination, and endanger the people. Finally, he said a few words about the Chinese Communist Party, and I'll conclude with this. He says, I've read Unrestricted Warfare. They explicitly contemplate environmental destruction and unrestricted warfare. The book written by Chinese colonels in 1999, which basically laid out exactly what they would do to us over the next 25 years. We know, thanks to Philip Lenzinski of the Daily Caller News Foundation, who reported just last week on some of these issues, and thanks to the work we did on the ground and Philip's advanced knowledge of Cantonese, Mandarin, the culture, the language, how these Chinese benevolent associations work, they're all front groups. By the way, the Chinese consulate in New York should be gone. It should not be allowed to be operating in the United States. Like the President of the United States should close it down immediately. Well, forgive me for that extended rendering of this fascinating interview. I commend the entire thing to you. It's available for free at Tucker Carlson's news network. I have not myself had a chance to see the video, High Times, but I'm sure it is also worth viewing. But with thanks to Steve Robinson, Tucker, for that rendering of their important work. I hope that you'll go to the entirety of it as well. We're going to turn next to a man who knows the state of Maine well. He has spent, I think, most of his adult life there when he's not been in the Navy as a naval intelligence officer or working in the federal government in a variety of capacities, including as a congressional counsel in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush White Houses, as a senior staff member on the House side of Congress, working on investigations and oversight, and also in the State Department as an assistant secretary of state under George W. Bush, responsible for narcotics and law enforcement affairs. His name is Robert Charles. He is the author of several books, notably about the state of Maine and some of its characters. He is also a candidate for governor of the state of Maine. And if we have him with us, we will go to Robert Charles now with very profound thanks for participating in this program. Bobby, you and I have talked about this problem for some time. I know you are seized with it, and we're very anxious to get your thoughts on not only what's happening in the state of Maine, but in rural areas and other places across America as a result of these marijuana grow operations, the Chinese triads and the like. Welcome back, sir. Good to see you now.
Thank you, Frank. So first, let me say that I am running for governor, and one of the reasons I'm running for governor is to reverse a lot of what Steve and Tucker talked about. So my hat is off to you, to Steve, to Tucker for putting a bright light on this. I cannot tell you how profound the changes in the state are that I grew up in. I grew up in rural Maine. I live not far from where I grew up. There are Chinese grow houses within a couple of miles of where I sit right here. There is no excuse in the world, honestly, for Governor Mills, the Democrat governor, and the Democrat legislature to have given the green light to these organizations, not to be taking them down, not to be working to try to protect the people of the state of Maine. So one of the most animating features for me is the siege that this state is under, and it literally is under siege from drug traffickers. When you open the door to not just the Chinese triads and these drug houses, these grow houses, which, as Steve is exactly right, he's, as he said, I think he traveled 10,000 miles around this state, every county, to try to understand this problem. I have been traveling for the last 2 years around every county, and in every county, sometimes when I'm sitting in a town hall or in a local environment where an American Legion or something, people can literally point out the window at a Chinese grow house. So they are pervasive. There is no excuse whatsoever for this governor not to have taken these down. She is they have decided, the Democrats, they want to turn this state into a sanctuary state. They've invited 8,000 illegal aliens in here. Most of the people you find in these grow houses are illegals. They should be swept out. I like to say they should be wire brushed out of this state. There is no excuse for it. And it endangers lives. And of course, it contributes to an upward cascade of drug trafficking. We have the Dominican drug trafficking groups are here, led by the Trinitarios. We have arms of the Sinaloa cartel here. We have major traffickers in different parts of the state. They've dominated it with meth trafficking. With the coast is particularly affected by meth trafficking. We have fentanyl everywhere. Think about this fact, Frank, and again, it animates me every day. Tonight, I will be speaking with large numbers of Mainers about this exact problem elsewhere in the state. Bottom line is, we had 10,000 overdoses in this state last year, between fatal and non-fatal. We lose between 40 and 70 kids a month. And the answer, as Steve so aptly pointed out, is they give out needles. If you're walking a dog in Bangor or in Portland, you have to watch where you're walking, kick the needles to the side. That is not Maine. That is not the place where we come for lobster rolls, where lots of the country thinks of a beautiful place covered with moose and, great pristine forest land. As Steve pointed out, this has a toxic effect. It is affecting our environment. It is affecting our kids. It is affecting the culture. So the first thing I want to say to you, Frank, is that there is a culture of lawlessness growing up here in the state of Maine. It's felt everywhere. We take down we take down drug houses, not these Chinese grow houses, because they pop right back up like mushrooms after a rain, because at the end of the day, this governor doesn't care. This AG doesn't care. But we take down drug houses filled with fentanyl and meth and heroin and crack cocaine. The former U.S. attorney, by the way, wouldn't even bring crack cocaine cases. There were so many other cases. The bottom line is we take down houses, drug houses in places like Fairfield and Windham and all over the southern and northern part of the state. I'm going to be up in Fort Kent next week. We take down these drug houses that have between enough fentanyl in them and other drugs to kill between 100,000 and 500,000 Mainers a week. Okay, we take down that number of drug houses a week. This has become a weed garden, literally and figuratively. And so my first point, I guess, is that we are accommodating, we are acquiescing in a culture of lawlessness here that must be reversed. That is one of the first things I will do. The second thing we're looking at, and it relates directly, and Steve mentioned it in that interview, is that we have a crisis of accountability. This governor, this governor's brother, this governor's friends and family, they, at the end of the day, there is no accountability. They did an audit recently, they found $2.1 billion in non-competed contracts going out to friends and family. Why? Because the Democrats have controlled this state by a teeny little margin. They have controlled it for 30 of the last 32 years. And I am going to fundamentally reverse that. I am going to restore public safety, get the drug traffickers out of here within weeks or months. We will get rid of most of the major drug traffickers. We will have those warrants to take down those houses. We will destroy them, and we will ultimately find ways to put that kind of resource housing back into the hands of homeless veterans who incidentally have been displaced by the illegal aliens. We're going to find ways to restore the state's affordability. Everything, Frank, I'll end with this. You can either have a virtuous cycle where good decisions are made by the government and it allows the private sector and individuals, families, children to have a productive, successful life where they feel safe, unhunted by these Chinese and other traffickers, or you can do the reverse. You can have a vicious cycle in which everything feeds into everything. And today we have the highest property taxes in the United States in Maine. We have our education system has fallen to number 50 of 50. There is a complete collapse of what I would call the proper and sort of traditional and historic civic order. And a lot of that goes back to things like these drug houses. These grow houses, Frank, are a genuine threat to public safety, and I am going to get them all down and out.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate your passion on this subject, and I think it further reinforces the point that the problem is grave, obviously in your state, but everywhere else where it is manifesting as well. And if you can stay with us, we'll probably ask you a question or two based on your experience in the State Department contending with drug trafficking as it bears on, of course, the public health in our country, but also the national security. We're going to hear next from another member of our Committee on the Present Danger China. I should have noted that Bobby Charles is as well. Dr. Sean Lin. He is a PhD who has an extensive background in biological warfare defense and understanding bio threats. In fact, he is the co-founder of what is known as the CCP Bio Threats Initiative. He is also a senior advisor to the World Organization to investigate the persecution of Falun Gong, blight that the Chinese have also afflicted, in that case on their own people, not simply ours, and others around the world. He is, not least, a survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre. We are very, very honored to have him with us to talk a bit about, what I think is the Chinese Communist Party's chemical warfare in America, the health and environmental repercussions of these marijuana operations. Sean, it's great to have you, sir. Welcome once again. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Listen to you and Charles just talk about the situation in Maine. It really saddens me. It reminded me actually in the 1940s when the Chinese Communist Party had a so-called civil war against Kuomintang. At the time, the Chinese Communist Party have its own territory in the northwest of China, and then the Kuomintang only majority of the China. But at the time, the Communist Party already using the tactic about these illegal drug, right? So in Shanxi province at the time, CCP had this official marijuana business. They grow marijuana in tremendous volumes and then make drugs from there and then deliver it through illegal trafficking routes into the area, the territories that the Kuomintang controls. And CCP not only make a lot of money from this to support their own operation in Shanxi province, and they also devastated the province in Hebei province, in Shandong province, in many provinces when people get so many drugs, and it also ruins local economies too. And so this kind of remind me this kind of situation. Now China have these decades of experience of how to cultivate marijuana, and then now we have the free land in the United States. So basically, they try to create this marijuana producing mechanism, selling mechanism, trafficking system inside the U.S. try to ruin the population here. So to me, cultivating marijuana, this illegal cultivation, is not just cultivating the marijuana. It's actually cultivating a market that so many American people can be addicted to drugs. At the beginning, it's the marijuana, and people can feel this is just initial entertainment. But eventually, the CCP goal is to attract American people to more lethal fentanyl. Right? In this process, of course, a lot of Chinese gangs, some of these, cartel, their drug cartels can make a lot of money from this process. But the key issue is eventually they will destroy American culture, kill many American people, weaken American power in the global stage. So I think this is the whole scheme. And so in this process, of course, many of the Chinese gangsters can be utilized, can be incentivized by the government to grow these marijuana. So at the beginning, they also do a lot this kind of illegal marijuana cultivation in the Golden Triangle in the Southeast Asia, and they learned a lot from this experience in those areas, because those areas also have very poor law enforcement. So they learn how to use all kinds of modern fertilizers, modern toxic insecticides, pesticides, and they collect a lot of experience in the Golden Triangle. And now these Chinese gangsters bring their experience into the America, and they can do it very efficiently because they know when they use this toxic pesticide, insecticide, they can quickly kill any insects, even kill many of the rodents in the farm. They can harm their cultivation of the marijuana. And so they can have very big boost of the production of marijuana. And so in this way, they can make a lot of marijuana and they sell it at a lower price. And then they can flood it into the American market to create younger generation, create American community into like a huge market to the really want the entertainment for marijuana. So in this way, they can make a lot of money in this process and ruin American community. So these predicts, they have a lot of experience accumulated in Golden Triangle, and they know these definitely are very highly toxic pesticide, insecticides, and many of those even can causing lethal problems. For example, carbofuran. This is a very, extremely toxic insecticide. It's banned in the US, it's banned in China, but they still can bring it to the United States, and it can kill people with very minute, minimum quantities. And so this exposure can cause neurological symptoms, vomiting, respiratory distress. You can basically treat this like neurotoxins. And then they also use organophosphates, like profanols and also phenylbucarbs. Some of these organophosphates, these are also illegal drugs in the United States, illegal fertilizer chemicals in the United States, but don't care about the impact to the people who cultivate the marijuana, don't care about the consumers using the marijuana, they don't care about the impact to the environment. Right? So not only these the toxic pesticide instead can heal the nerve system, it can be even lethal if people just inhale it. And also, it will also cause a large environmental damages because many of these cultivation houses, they use a lot of fertilizer as well. They also need to use a lot of cleaning reagents, and all these runoff will be polluting the environment, and also the damage to the soil is long term. It's not easy to be dissolved when it's absorbed into the soil. So it can be a long time damage. And not only these just pesticides, you also have heavy metals involved in there. So you can have lead, you can have arsenic, you can have cadmiums. All these also contaminants for the soil, and these substances can also further into the food chains. And so in this way, many people consume some of the products growing from the neighborhood farms or from the animals can also have health hazards. So this impact is tremendous in so many different aspects. And also in this cultivation house, they also have problem with microbial and biological contaminants, for example, mold, fungi. So they also use a lot of fungicide as well. And also these areas are also quite often contaminated with different pathogens, bacterial pathogens like E. coli, salmonellas. So these illicit cannabis growing house, they can have very poor health condition, and the workers and the illegal immigrants working in there can have huge health problem as well. But the Chinese drug law doesn't care about the situation. What they care is just about the profit and how do they create even larger market in the United States. And the Chinese gangsters doing this drug market, they are very unique because they have a lot of experience creating a large network, and they have tremendous organized network, so they can come to Maine in this area to buying the different properties. And you didn't see other minorities like Hispanic or African American doing this business because Chinese gangster is the most well organized, and they occupy more than 80% of the business of illegal marijuana cultivations. And they know this is a very effective way to make a lot of money and then ruin the American society. So I think this is part of the big chemical warfare strategy that CCP push out. They let these gangsters bring their experience from China, from Southeast Asia, from the Golden Triangle, bring it to the United States, and then expand the business, ruin American culture, and then at the same time they manufacture fentanyls in Mexico, and then bring it through Mexico or through Canada to the United States, and then kill more people. So this is a great strategy. So let me just finish here right now.
Wonderful. Sean, thank you so much. You're absolutely right. Of course, fentanyl is a whole nother line of chemical warfare attack by the Chinese communists against us. And it's, now, as I recall, the last number I saw was something like 200,000 Americans have been murdered by that form of toxic agent. It remains to be seen what the loss of life is as a result of the kinds of chemical warfare with the marijuana grow operations that you've described and Steve reported on as well. We're going to turn next to another of our colleagues at the Committee on the Present Danger China, I'm proud to say. His name is Trevor Loudon. He is a very regular feature of these webinars, and I cannot express adequately how appreciative I am that he unfailingly makes himself available, including on very short notice, as was the case today. Trevor is one of America's, national treasures. I call him a binational treasure, as he hails originally from New Zealand. But we appreciate him here for sure, and are delighted that he has made it his life's work to document the phenomenon of enemies within. And I'm fond of pointing out that since Joseph Stalin successfully destroyed Joseph McCarthy, a senator who warned for a time, effectively and actually quite accurately, about Soviet communist penetration of our government. Once he was taken out, the communists made a point of trying to ensure that we thought there was no such thing as enemies within, and ceased to be concerned about what is a real and ongoing, indeed intensifying problem, about which Trevor is, as I say, an extraordinary authority. He is an author, a filmmaker, an essayist, a podcaster, a public speaker of great renown, and his books would fill a bookshelf. I think, in fact, many of them are on the one behind him, as a matter of fact, including Enemies Within and two multi-volume sets talking about the penetration by the Chinese communists and democratic socialists and others, Islamists among them, of our Congress. House Un-Americans is the series on what's going on in the House of Representatives. Security Risk Senators, the one on the Senate side. We've asked Trevor to address a topic that I know he understands better, again, than just about anybody: the Chinese Communist Party's toxic penetration of America, and why it is that what we've just been treated to in terms of this nightmare of the Chinese marijuana chemical warfare is sadly just the tip of the iceberg. Trevor Loudon, welcome back. Over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Frank. I'd like to touch on an area that I think Sean and Robert have done a great job. Sean with the implications of drug use and why the Chinese do this, and Robert on the devastation this has done to Maine. But I'd like to put this in context of a broader strategy. And I want to quote, it's actually from my book on Kamala Harris, but I want to quote a top Chinese Communist Party official, Jin Kan Rong, an advisor to Xi Jinping, who gave this speech in Guangzhou City in 2016, July 2016. Now, I don't normally quote long passages, but I think this is worthwhile. We in the Chinese government hope that in the end, every US congressman's district will have Chinese investment, and China will be able to control 1,000 or several thousand votes and make the, sorry about this. In fact, the US House of Representatives can be controlled because the United States has 312 million people and 435,000 members of the House of Representatives, 435 members of the House of Representatives. On average, a congressional district has about 750,000 people, 750,000 vote. The vote is only about 30%. That is about 200,000 votes can decide the fate of the Congress, of a congressional candidate. Generally speaking, the number of votes, well, look, it's hard to read. What he goes on is that if we have Chinese companies and investment in every congressional district, we create constituencies of several thousand people who are dependent on the industries that are then controlled by the Chinese, whether legal or illegal. So this will mean, like, if you put a car plant in or a battery plant in northern Michigan, that local congressman, who may be an anti-China conservative Republican, will never criticize China again, because so many thousands of his people depend on the Chinese company for their livelihoods. Now, this extends to illegal businesses as well. A lot of people in Maine will be, the communities are being destroyed, but there are still people whose jobs depend on this: electrical contractors, all sorts of people who are making money off this operation. And so they have an investment in this. And then you get local law enforcement. You know, if you're a sheriff in a little county in Maine, you're not used to dealing with international organized crime, especially not state-sponsored organized crime. You don't know what to do with this. You're going to just leave this alone, which creates a climate of fear. It spreads corruption in your community. It attracts more of a criminal element and a downward spiral. So what I'm saying here is the drug situation, as bad as it is and as addicting as it is, and I think a big part of it is also the degradation of any future soldiers. We don't want drug-addicted soldiers going to our army to fight China. But, you know, it suits the Chinese to have as many of our young people as habitual drug users as possible to reduce their potential military effectiveness, or even in factory workers and construction work and military contracting. You know, the more drugged up people you have, the less efficient the system gets, the more accidents happen, and the less efficient you are at fighting a war. So there's that side of it. But also, you know, Texas and Florida have both passed laws banning Chinese buying of agricultural land in the state. Well, that should be in every state, and it shouldn't just be agricultural land, because as I pointed out, as Jin Khan Rong said, the purpose of Chinese investment, any investment in the country, is to increase China's political influence. He actually went on to say that by having Chinese investment at every congressional district, we can make the US Congress a subsidiary of the Chinese government. So this is a guy who's an advisor to Xi Jinping. So we look at the drug problem, which is horrific. We look at, you know, Chinese buying land right next to military bases, which is an obvious security risk. But with the advent of drone warfare, you can be 50 miles away from a US military base, and you can still send drones out to, you know, to take out airplanes on the tarmac or attack naval ships or whatever. So the point I'm getting at here is any Chinese investment, whether it's in drugs, legally or illegally, in farmland, whether it's producing pork or marijuana or whatever it's doing, is utilized as a strategic weapon by the CCP. And it also increases political influence in that area, and it allows a flow of money to fund organizations like voter registration organizations, to bribe local politicians, to bribe local electoral officials. You know, bringing the Chinese into your state is like letting the mafia take over your state. You'll make some money in the short term, but they'll sell drugs to your kids, they'll corrupt your politicians, they'll steal your technologies, they will interfere in your elections, and they will eventually take you over. That is how the CCP works. So it's not at all surprising that the CCP should be heavily involved in the drugs trade. As Sean pointed out, Mao Zedong was using it to defeat Chiang Kai-shek's forces. We know of the huge heroin use by the Chinese during the Vietnam War, you know, and you know, selling heroin into American troops serving in Vietnam. We know the Chinese influence all through Latin America, no doubt. Much of it, you know, we know that the fentanyl is shipped from China to Latin America to be shipped to the United States. We know that China will execute marijuana dealers in their own country, but they'll give tax incentives to the people who produce the precursors for fentanyl, which are then shipped to the United States. We should understand that there is nothing the Chinese do in this country that is not politically tinged, whether it's their influence in sport or Hollywood or politics or academia or agriculture. There's always a political and strategic reason for what they're doing. We understand that, you know, Chinese businesses are all to some degree or another tied into the CCP. They only operate at the CCP's permission. We know that Chinese organized crime is very much a part of the Chinese intelligence services. There are, we know they used organized crime to take over Vancouver in Canada. That was a deliberate Chinese Communist Party policy. And they got into real estate and started shipping funds into this country. We know that the Russians employ a similar strategy. There's a complete alliance between the Russian intelligence services and what we call the Russian mob. So I really applaud Robert Charles for saying that if he is governor of Maine, that this will be stopped, these farms will be closed down. But I think we have to look at this in the wider picture as well. All investment by the Communist Party of China in this country should be closed down. And Americans growing drug, and I'll say quite bluntly, the day that marijuana is prohibited at a federal level and at a state level, well, the federal government should be cracking down on any state that allows this cultivation, because it's always a corrupting influence. So I call for a complete end of communist Chinese investment in this country and a repatriation of that which is already here. It's just suicide, and an end to the so-called legal marijuana movement. Both of them are incredibly destructive, and it's not a surprise that the Chinese should use this destructive trade to do even more damage to this country in preparation for taking this country down.
Trevor, thank you for what is an absolutely profoundly important contribution to this program, and really to the 210 or whatever it is of these webinars that we've done. You've been, as I mentioned earlier, a very important contributor to many of them, but I think this was a singularly clear call to action. And I just wanted to say something, if I may, about your point on the issue of Chinese investment in this country, in whatever form it takes. As it happens, and you may have had this in mind as you were speaking about a battery plant in upstate Michigan and its congressman being, reduced, and shall we say, in his willingness to talk about the Chinese threat by virtue of the fact that there might be employees there in the plant who are constituents and voters, at least some of them. As it happens, John Molinar represents people in upstate Michigan. He happens also to be the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. And he has been doing, I think it's fair to say, extraordinarily important work of, raising awareness about what the Chinese are doing, specifically calling out people like Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, and Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America. He did it just, I think, yesterday on Maria Bartiromo's wonderful Fox Business program, pointing out that these are guys who are helping a Chinese battery manufacturer called Cattle. The plant that it's trying to build, I think, is a little further south of his constituency, but there's another one called Goshen that was up in, that is, I think, in his district. And he's been very, very formidable in his opposition to both what the Chinese are trying to do and what Americans like Dimon and Moynihan are doing to help them. And I just wanted to say one further point on this, if I may. This issue of Chinese investment in the United States, inbound investment, if you will, is something that is featured prominently in a national security presidential memorandum that Donald Trump issued on the 21st of February, 2025. It explicitly says we are going to restrict what the Chinese are doing in terms of these investments, especially if they are in any way involving, national security related threats. And I think you've made the case persuasively, Trevor, that all of them do. The name of this memorandum is America First Investment Policy. The other part of it, by the way, is an outbound investment strategy. The president has explicitly said we're not going to be investing in Chinese companies, particularly Chinese military tied or civil military fusion companies. And that basically describes them all, as you've indicated, Trevor. So I just wanted to call attention to our audience of these important leaders on the one hand, and some of the work they're trying to do. We need to have, as you've said, Trevor, the president actually enforcing that America First investment policy. It's not been done so far. This battery manufacturer called Cattle, CATL, was able to get, with Diamond and Moynihan's help, something on the order of $4.6 billion from American investors to help this Chinese military company, so designated by the United States Pentagon, by the way, to continue prospering and growing and becoming more dangerous, as it is helping the Chinese military to do as well. Trevor, I think you're trying to get a word in edgewise here. Over to you.
Anything that helps the Communist Party of China, whether it's selling them Scotch whiskey or whatever, is still relief. It still means they can spend, any money they make here makes it easier for them, for their economy to grow, to stay stable, and to produce a military machine. But look, we're talking about Goshen up in northern Michigan. When that was very controversial, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, my favorite enemies of America, the pro-Chinese Communist Party that started the recent LA riots and ran the Black Lives Matter riots, was sending people up to northern Michigan from Detroit to lobby on behalf of that factory, to try and shut down the opposition to that factory by local people. So plus, I've talked a lot on these shows about the massive pro-Chinese voter registration organizations that they have here as well. Detroit Action and Detroit and Michigan, Pennsylvania Stands Up in Pennsylvania. So all of this, every bit of Chinese influence in this country is strategic. Now, a lot of these guys are just here to make money, but they are directed and given permission to operate in certain areas by the CCP. They don't mind their minions making some money as long as it has the desired strategic effect. So it isn't just land next to military bases. It isn't just what we would normally think of strategic. Everything is weaponized. Every bit of Chinese investment in this country is weaponized against the people. Now we have to confront that reality.
Absolutely. Sean, I want to pull you into this too. I would particularly appreciated your comments about the environmental as well as health consequences of what the Chinese are doing. And the point that you've made, as did Trevor just now, that this is strategic. This is not just collateral damage. This is calculated to harm these communities in one way or another. Especially, as I say, the water, the land itself, as well as, of course, the individuals who are consuming these products. Could you say just a further word, if you feel comfortable assessing this, of just the problem with marijuana itself? Trevor's just made the point, and I couldn't agree with it more personally, that the federal ban on the consumption of marijuana, which is now honored in the breach in quite a number of states, is in place because this stuff is hazardous to your health, especially at the higher levels of THC, as I understand it. Is that correct, sir?
These drugs is very because it's gradually become more and more seductive. So marijuana illicit cultivation house, they have when they're using so strong pesticide insecticide, actually it will actually transform some of the chemical structures and organic components inside the marijuana as well. And so the product they use will be even more seductive, it will be more addictive for people to using the marijuana. So to pay attention to the product they produce there, it's not those marijuana that people originally campaigned for medical uses. It's actually different. And at the same time, these marijuana products, when they using Chinese way to produce it, it can make it more addictive as well. So definitely it's a strategic way. They grow their own version of marijuana and then enrich for their toxin capabilities, increase its addictive capacities as well. So the definitely pave a better way for fentanyl to come in to kill people. And so people become more and more get used to the so-called concept you getting some relaxed entertainment from marijuana, so-called entertainment consumption. So definitely need to be tracking down in history who was the forces promoting marijuana entertainment usage. I think there's a problem with being rooted for a long time, and the communist ideologies and their tactics has been infiltrated in the United States for a long time. So that's created overall situation that American society changed their livelihood, changed their habits, changed their so-called entertainment resources. I think we need to look into that in a deeper way.
I thank you for pointing this out. Our colleague Didi Laugesen has just shared with me some statistics that there are medical uses of marijuana that you've just mentioned, Sean, that are allowed in 40 of our 50 states, and in 24 of the states, recreational use or entertainment use, as you put it, is permitted as well. And especially with just the higher power, I guess one might call it, of the legal versions of marijuana, to say nothing of what's being insinuated into the supply by the Chinese Communist Party and its triad gangs, is unquestionably going to compound the problem of drug abuse in our country, and harder drugs as well. All of which, as Trevor has pointed out, serves the interests of the Chinese Communist Party.
This idea, I think, that marijuana is a soft drug, is one of the biggest demotivators you can possibly imagine. They don't call it dope for nothing. Like I've got a very close friend who's got a young boy who works in a restaurant, and he's practically manager there now at 22, because he's the only one there that doesn't smoke dope. He's the only one that turns up there every day, that works a full shift, that is reliable. All of the rest of them are outside using marijuana at work. It is endemic amongst the young people, especially in certain industries. But it's a huge demotivator. It's an insidious drug, and I think it's worse than many of the so-called hard drugs because of the long-term psychological effects that it has on people. It's not an immediate thing, like it's not going to kill you, it's not going to send you to the emergency room, but over a period of several years' use, it's going to do massive damage to your psychology. And this is hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of young Americans who are coming into the workforce at low efficiency levels, and let alone what they'll be like in the military if called to serve. So yeah, I think marijuana is not in any way a soft drug or a harmless drug or a gateway drug to worse things. I think it is one of the worst things.
Could I come back to you, Sean?
Yes.
This is you've kind of alluded to it, but the extent to which we have seen criminal enterprises, and now, as we've been discussing over the past hour, our most dangerous enemy actively exploiting the opportunity to be present here, to be cultivating these certainly hazardous, if not actually toxic, drugs, and participating in a burgeoning criminal enterprise by disseminating them across the country. This creates a kind of chemical warfare that is, arguably vastly more dangerous than a lot of the others. I mean, in tactical situations, as you know from your time in the United States Army, chemical weapons can be very, very hazardous to your health, for sure. But we're talking about across the country and a population that is absolutely huge, if not very substantial part of our population. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, again, in the context of what the Chinese are thinking about this and their exploitation of these opportunities.
Ironically, CCP in the past decades keep reminding Chinese people. They said the Western industrial countries defeated China through the Opium War, right? Mm-hmm. So they were blaming the Western powers bringing opium to China and making Chinese younger generation so weak, and they keep broadcasting those pictures, images that the Chinese young generation lying on the bed just smoking the opiums. And they said this is devastating to the China in the 19th centuries. Well, they basically actually using the same strategy, or is in a reverse way. They're using this opium war right now against the United States. Yeah. So they, definitely want to weaken the American younger generation by making them addicted to the modern opium, this is the marijuana. So I fully agree with Trevor's point. Even when I was in the military, I know the young soldiers, when they get to Friday night, get to Saturdays, quite often they find a place, enjoy some marijuanas. It's a common, actually, in young soldiers. I was shocked at the time. But anyway, it becomes so common for younger generations. And so this is definitely changing the younger generation culture. Their concept about how to relax themselves, how to reduce stress, and they being brainwashed that you can use this marijuana to create some entertainment. It's a recreational usage of the drug. So definitely CCP is applying this tactic to the United States. And like Trevor mentioned, Mr. Jin Changrong, he's the advisor to Xi Jinping, to the top leaders in China. And he also mentioned his own word is in Chinese called 邪招. It means wicked strategies. He said that CCP can use some wicked strategy against the United States, and not only just influence the elections and control U.S. market, but also weaken the American society. This is also one of the tactics. So now you can see they're implementing it step by step, very strategically, very aggressively, and they exporting the transnational organized crime into the United States to run it. On the surface, they are maybe like just like a low-level gangster, but no, if you look at the Chinese transnational criminal organization, they have the most sophisticated organization strategies. They have MBA knowledge in there. They have doctors involved in making different versions of drugs. So they are the most sophisticated, most educated, most well-run transnational criminal organization. So this definitely is very bad news.
Yeah. Let the record show that it was the Brits who used opium on the Chinese, and obviously it did have a hugely destructive effect on the Chinese population at the time. Could you just answer one other question, Sean, about the relationship between the Chinese triads and the Chinese Communist Party? There, I'm sure, are some who are going to hear this and say, well, that's the Chinese mafia. That's not the Chinese government. And one of the reasons why I wanted to read that passage from Steve Robinson's interview with Tucker Carlson about these United Front Work Department operations out of the Chinese consulate. And Trevor, you're an expert on this, so I want to get your thoughts on it as well. But is there, in fact, plausible deniability, even, let alone actual, firewalls between the Chinese communists and the mafia that operates in China and elsewhere around the world, including here? Sean?
Well, it was CCP actually is behind all these drug laws and their operations in Golden Triangle area. And the Chinese government financially supporting the juntas, the warlords in those areas, and make sure that they can create a territory for the Chinese operations. And so Chinese not only do these illicit drug cultivation in those areas, but they also set up, now they even telephone scamming camps in there. And so all kinds of, illegal operation, they can set it up in those regions, and then Chinese government providing the mechanism for money launderings as well. And so basically it's CCP operated system. Just they are not in the front, but it's definitely CCP supported the operation. And you can see even fentanyl, it's very specific target to the United States. If you look at Southeast Asia, the fentanyl is not on the market in there, but it's very specifically targeted to the United States. So it's definitely a strategic move, and the government, CCP government, is behind it, providing the production, providing the chemistry, providing the chemical engineers, and then providing the money laundering system. And then they set up the distributor network in the United States as well through the organized crime network. Yeah, and then they can use their WeChat system for these concealed communications, so that the law enforcement in the United States hard to track. Yeah,
right. This is such an important point, and again, I think that there is a tendency to give the Chinese the benefit of the doubt when they insist that they're shocked. They're shocked that there's fentanyl, the ingredients for it coming out of China. I mentioned John Molinar, who I really hold in the highest regard. I think all of our committee on the Present Danger China do. He has produced a study from the committee that indicates that the Chinese government is actually subsidizing the production of the fentanyl ingredients, as well as in the other ways that you're talking about, ensuring that they get to the hands of the cartels where they're assembled and then moved into the United States with just incredibly devastating effect. Trevor, would you like to say something further about this this issue of the Chinese Progressive Association, for example, and the ties to the official diplomatic apparatus of China and the United Front operations?
Yeah, well, look, if you look at San Francisco, 40 years, and then up to the 1960s, you had the Tongs in San Francisco who basically ran Chinatown, and they were sort of cross between organized crime and benevolent societies. They ran crime, but they also looked after the communities, and they were very anti-communist. They hated the CCP, and they generally supported Taiwan and America. Well, the Chinese Progressive Association was set up in 1972 by young Maoist students who had direct relationship to the Chinese consulate, regularly sent delegations to communist China, and openly promoted the CCP line. They built up power in San Francisco over many years by controlling the voting process, to the point that virtually every supervisor in San Francisco, what other places would call a city councillor, they owe their jobs to Chinese Progressive Association influence. And over that time, the Tongs, which are still active in San Francisco, have switched their position from pro-Taiwan to pro-CCP, because they could see the writing on the wall, they could see where they could make the most money, and they could see that by enabling China in San Francisco and Sacramento and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., that would best serve their interest. So, yeah, even many of the traditional old-fashioned Chinese tongs that operate in most big Chinese communities in the United States and through the Chinese diaspora, many of them have been flipped to the pro-CCP attitude. You see this even in Taiwan. The Kuomintang, which has a lot of connections to the Tongs in Taiwan, was militantly anti-CCP. Well, now the Kuomintang is the pro-CCP party in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. So there's been this gradual mixture of using the Chinese organized crime, the Chinese Tongs, all this kind of thing, plus political organizations to reorient the Chinese diaspora or large sections of the Chinese diaspora to a pro-CCP position. That has been completed in San Francisco and in Hawaii, I believe. Still an ongoing process in New York, but this is what we see all around the world. This co-option of the shadow governments in the Chinese communities, plus the direct Chinese involvement with the politics of those communities, is flipping those communities from an anti-CCP standpoint to a pro-CCP standpoint.
Points that you have documented to a fairly well in your various books, including notably the ones that I mentioned about the Congress of the United States, House and Senate. Trevor, I can't resist the strong impulse I feel every time I have you on these programs to ask you to talk about what we need to do about these problems. And obviously, Bobby Charles has talked about, if he were to become governor, taking the lead in trying to use the power of the state to shut them down. But you've also come up with an ingenious idea that I wanted to encourage you to remind us of in terms of some of the techniques that we've used against organized crime in this country.
Yeah, well, this has been used against organized crime. The British used this to take down the thuggy gangs in India. Dewey used it to take down Murder Inc. So what we need to do in this country is either set up a new section of the FBI or a new organization 100% dedicated to ending foreign influence, illicit foreign influence in the country. And this has to be a very vetted unit. You might interview 20,000 people to get 1,000, but super vetted unit that goes after foreign influence. Then I believe the president has to declare an amnesty, because I would say there's probably 1 million people in America right now who are working for a foreign government, either willingly or unwillingly. And they are in all sorts of prominent positions and sabotaging our efforts at every turn to end this problem. So if the president declares an amnesty, he could say something like, okay, we've got a new agency to deal with foreign infiltration. If you are a foreign spy agent, you're an American traitor, you're working with China or the Russian mob, or you're working with, the Cubans or the North Koreans or whatever, or the Muslim Brotherhood, you've got an amnesty. We're going to give you an amnesty. If you're a foreigner, you've got 3 months to leave the country and never return. We will not pursue you. If you live here or you're a permanent resident or a citizen and you want to stay here, you got 3 months to come into this new agency and spill your guts, register your name, tell us everything you know, who you co-opted, who co-opted you, what you stole, what you influenced, who your contacts were. Tell us every single thing you know. And if you do that and are willing to testify, you will get full immunity from prosecution and witness protection if necessary. You would see hundreds of thousands of foreigners leave the country within 3 months. You would see a massive meltdown of every foreign intelligence service in the country, because the Iranian businessmen who was bribing the US senator wouldn't know if the senator had taken the deal and was wearing a wire, and the senator wouldn't know if the Iranian businessman had taken the deal and was wearing a wire. The whole trust factor and all of these networks would melt down. Thousands of people would come forward to take advantage of the opportunity, and they would give us so much information that those few who did not take the opportunity could be easily prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and punished accordingly. This is how you take down organized crime. You find the rats, you get low-level rats, and you get them to testify against the others, and you collapse the whole organization. And then the American people would finally understand how deep this problem was and support the security measures going forward to make sure it doesn't repeat.
A brilliant point on which to conclude this program. I thank each of our distinguished panelists. Steve Robinson, in his fashion, contributing. We're so sorry that he was unable to do it today, but we were delighted to be able to take advantage of his good work with Tucker Carlson. Robert Charles, Sean Lynn, and Trevor Loudon, thank you for very, very helpfully illuminating the larger problem of the infiltration by the Chinese Communist Party and its minions, the help it's getting from its friends, and this particular line of attack, the chemical warfare one, in their unrestricted warfare playbook. I hope that each of you who are listening with us at the moment or will be in the days to come will make a point of doing what we ask of each of you every time. Please take advantage of this information to become engaged in doing what you can about the problems we discuss. Share it with your friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, and others in the hopes that we will, in fact, see not only a more clear understanding on the part of our people of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to try to destroy this country and to become part of the solution to it in ways that, among other things, Trevor Loudon has just articulated so well. We're going to leave it at that at my end. I'm going to turn it back over to Dee Dee with just a thanks for your participation and my prayer that God will bless you all and our country as well. Back to you, Dee Dee.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the conclusion of this program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. For webinar notices, updates, news, please subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack and follow us on X at CPDChina. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.